I recently purchased Crown and Skull. Crown and Skull, there it is. A recently released RPG by Runehammer. It's volume one. There's supposed to be more books coming out. And I did not buy the cool fancy gold version, which was super expensive. This version was more reasonable. It comes with a PDF, of course, and so you can get it immediately, even as this thing flies through the mail. And there's a lot of interesting ideas in it. It's sort of a light game with a little bit of an OSR vibe, but there are certainly a lot of interesting ideas in here. And I am not all the way through. I have not played yet, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. This is simply a read through of the rules, and my opinions and thoughts are just based on my sense of how the rules might go. So let's hit a few of the highlights, and let's start with character creation. Now, character creation is one of the interesting things here because character creation is done hero system and GURP style. It is a point-by system. You start with 50 points. You can get 10 more points by taking flaws for your character. Those of you that have done point-by games are probably pretty knowledgeable about flaws. So you can have 50 points, you can buy 10 points worth of flaws, which will raise you up to 60. A lot of folks are going to do that because you don't necessarily want to be behind your buds, when they get all the 60 points. And we'll talk about some of that in a minute. And with those 50 or 60 points, there's no stats in the game. There's no strength, there's no dexterity, there's nothing. Your character is not defined by that. You're instead defined by your core abilities. Well, one core ability. That's going to cost you 15 points. And those are things like Druid or Veteran Commander or Battle Master. They are sort of a grand concept for your guy. There are 12 of them listed in the game. And a lot of places you're, of course, encouraged to make up your own stuff and either have the player run it by the GM or have the GM make up their own. And I could see a lot of homebrew going into that. But for instance, Battle Master. You've been trained as a soldier who knows how to hit hard. When you roll maximum damage, roll again. There's no limit to the number of times a die can explode. Okay, interesting. Druid I like because you gain tracking and hunting for free each at 9. We'll talk about that. Those are skills. And when outdoors, you get a +3 to all your skills, right? So there's a lot of different ones that can make, and they all, I think, make a fair bit of difference in the game. I think they're worth the 15 points are very expensive. That is a quarter or more of your points, depending on if you take the limitations or not. But I think most of them are worth it, and most of them, work out point-wise to what they would be. So the min-maxer will want to go, I'm going to take Druid if I'm going to be the outdoors guy, because buying tracking and hunting at 9 each is going to cost you more than taking Druid for 15. And that's your core ability. So you might say, well, I'm a Druid, but then there's no other. Druid does nothing else for you. It's not a class. You don't keep worry about that anymore. You just have the core ability, and then you're going to go buy your skills. And the skills are rated from 3 to 18, and that's how much they're going to cost. If you buy a skill at 3, it costs you 3. If you buy a skill at 18, it's going to cost you 18 points, so quite a bit. And pretty much, it's a roll-under system. And so if you buy Armorer at 9, then when you try to repair a piece of armor, you're going to have a 9 or less chance on a d20 to succeed. So about 45% chance. Now, that does make skills pretty expensive. You're not going to have a ton of these. There's not a ton in the book. I'm not going to count them here on, that's sort of silly. But they are ranged from things like animal training. So you can charm or induce an animal companion to perform simple actions. Scholar, you know stuff about a topic. Faith, call forth miracles with prayer. We'll talk about faith in a little bit. Magic, it's not to cast spells, it's to contain infernal or unstable magic, or as a resistance to spells, and so on, right? There's different skills, and they run, I think, a reasonably traditional gambit of tabletop RPG skills. In addition, though, there are some skills that feel like they substitute in for stats a little bit. Muscle. Have a knack for leverage, a powerful grip, and raw strength. Roll this skill to bend bars, lift the unliftable, or brace against a win. Evade. Used to avoid attacks that armor cannot protect against. And resist. You are hardy. Ignore. Extreme cold, poison, too many mugs of ale, right? So that sounds like strength, dexterity, and constitution, but you have to buy them as skills, and everybody else is just assumed to be a putz, like me. So all good. I think I think that works. Your gear is going to cost you too, so that's another thing you're purchasing, and that is everything. Literally everything you are going to carry on you is going to have been bought with points for the most part. I believe. I'm not 1,000% sure, and we will talk about that a little bit as we go further. But there's not a ton of gear listed in the book. The basic equipment list is 20 items. That's definitely not going to run the gambit of things that your players are going to want to carry. But there is a guide, right? Gear is generally 1, 2, or 3 points, with the exception of the backpack, which is 6. But like a rope is 1 point. An iron chain is 1 point. Lockpicks are a point, and so on. And you can sort of imagine that you're going to probably fill up, and you can only have 10 of these. You can only carry 10 unless you take certain flaws, in which case you can carry less, or carry a backpack, in which you can carry more. But backpack costs 6 points, so ouch. Your weapon is a piece of gear, and your armor are pieces of gear, and that counts against your limit, and that's going to cost you points. The neat thing about your weapons and armor is that you can customize them. So, for instance, you could buy a weapon. Let's say you buy a sword, a longsword. What does that cost? The longsword costs 2 points, but then you could upgrade it with something like deadly, which effectively doubles the damage of the D8 longsword. You could make it bleed, which if you hit someone, they will take damage round after round, right? So that's going to cost you points. You could spend a ton of points on some of this gear, I think, if you keep, if you upgrade it. You can also take limitations on gear, things like breakable, stolen, heavy, and so on. So you can further customize. And you're probably going to want to do that for things like weapons or armor. You're not going to, I don't imagine you're doing it for rope, but I suppose you could. Oh, I have a deadly rope. but certainly for things like weapons, like if you want to start with an heirloom sword, bam, you can easily throw it together in this system. The math is also, for a point-buy system, the math is super simple. And I'm getting ahead of myself. And the last thing is you can take flaws. And as I said, flaws are things like, oh, you have a grudge against some type of monster, or you're impetuous, which means you can only act at the beginning of a round, or you're an ascetic, which is you can only carry 5 items instead of your 10, right? There's a lot of different ones, some personality quirks, some physical limitations, and so on. And all in all, I will say that system looks quick, it looks easy, it looks reasonably fun. I think the characters you can generate with the system are reasonably diverse and specialized. Like, you could easily make the wizened scholar, you could easily make the muscly barbarian, right? The stout dwarf who has a problem with his ale, right? Or the the elf that has lived 1,000 years, maybe. I think you can make all those different characters, and those 50 or 60 points go super quick. So you're not talking, and they do give you, the book does give you templates to follow, so you could just pop a template down. Now, I don't super love some of the templates because, again, I wonder if they are, I say balanced, but if some of them, but they work. They do the job, right? You could get in 2 minutes and get a template. It's going to fill up maybe a note card at most. They do give you character sheets and stuff in the PDFs that you get, and so super simple to create a character though, and I would definitely suggest point buying your character. So now, in addition to those 4 basic things, skills, gear, flaws, and core abilities, you also have to, at the beginning, buy spells if you're going to be a spellcaster, and companions, potentially. And I'd like to talk about those a little separately. So I think I like this system generally. My main problem, and I think this is the problem that I have with this game in general, is I'm picky. So this is a me problem, not a you problem. But I think the problem that I have is, though, as I'm reading through it, I'm like, oh, this is neat. This gets me excited to play a point buy system again. Like, it makes me want to go look at my old hero books, of course, and so on. It's very evocative and sort of cool, but I don't know if it comes together into a game yet. And I haven't played it. So again, I ask you, take this with a grain of salt. But just reading through, there are so many ambiguities, things that I don't quite get, imbalances, or things that I immediately look and go, well, my players would instantly do this because this makes the most sense, that I worry that it doesn't quite come together. Or if it does come together, it only comes together because, you know what, I've done point buy systems before, and I'm okay making crap up as I go. So I'll wing it, and we'll make this work. But I'll bet you that first couple sessions is going to be a lot of negotiation and a lot of asking questions as my players start looking through the options and building their characters. So even though character creation could take you like 5 minutes, I bet there's going to be a lot of, I could just do this, right? So let's talk about some of my concerns about the character creation that I saw. The first one is, much like in Hero and much like in GURPS, I feel that given the option, most players, 90% of players, and certainly 100% of all my players, are going to take the 10 points of flaws. I think you have to. I think 60 points goes super quick. 50 points is going to go way quicker than 60. And so you got to take those flaws. And that's fine. I don't mind that. And of course, flaws tie your character to the world and blah, blah, right? I get all that. But after playing Hero for a while, and after having them in the original versions of my own games, I actually got rid of them as a point buy mechanic. Because the temptation for almost everybody is to look at the flaws and go, well, I'm going to take the ones that aren't mechanical in nature. I'm going to take the flaws that are story-based or psychology-based or do not imply a direct mechanical disadvantage. So, for instance, I suppose my point is, all flaws are not made equal in the game. Even the ones that are listed, they are not made equally. So, for instance, if I'm a player of this game and my players are going to take employed or grudge, because all those say is, hey, man, you have a grudge. You've been wronged. You hold it against an individual or group unjustly. When you encounter them, you behave terribly. Employed, you are paid or oath sworn to a lord or employer. Disobey at your own peril. or drunkard, right? I mean, those have social effects and possibly story effects. But they are much, much better than addict. If you don't get a specific thing, you suffer attrition. And we'll talk about attrition when we talk about combat. You frown on possessions, aesthetic. You never have more than 5 pieces of equipment. And again, as we talk about attrition, you're going to know why that's potentially problematic, right? So, I mean, there are flaws that don't impact you mechanically, and the GM is then forced to make sure they impact you. You know, it's like hunted in Hero. If anybody ever played Hero, you could always take a hunted. And you go, well, I'll take a hunted on 8 or less. And that's great. Hunted on 8 or less. That means 25% of the time this guy shows up and he's trying to harm you or make your life harder. Except that when everyone takes hunted, there's 6 players in the game and you all took hunted, that means that it is a good chance that every session then becomes something about the hunted. And so the GM is then forced to mitigate that collective set of choices and go, well, maybe hunted doesn't mean he comes after you this session because I already have stuff ready for this session. Maybe hunted means you just hear about him or get a clue or some nefarious, right? You hear about him. Doesn't mean he shows up. But then, of course, I'm going to take a hunted then because we're all going to take one. So it really means 25% times 1/6 until the GM does the crazy episode where all the villains bind together and just nuke your sorry asses. I might have done that once or twice, but I mean, but my point is, you take employed. Half the campaigns in the world have you employed by someone anyway. So, is it a flaw or is it not a flaw? And the answer is sure, it's a flaw. If the GM wants to make his story about the flaw tonight, as opposed to, hey, I'm just a kid, never exceeds 6 skills, right? And so I just feel like I would almost just go take the damn 60 points, and we'll talk about flaws that you have, and then sort of make them work or not work. And this is a minor gripe. This is not something that Crown and Skull does exclusively. Every damn point system has this same problem. As soon as they add limitations, you make the incentive for the players to not skirt them, but to look and go, well, what's going to give me the most bang for my buck? And the most bang for your buck is pursued. And the nemesis is out there somewhere hunting you. Sure. That's way better than taking damage if I don't get cocaine. That's too close to real life. So that's the first thing that I worry about a little bit. The second thing is there's gotcha skills in the game. And by gotcha skills, I mean skills that you do not have to take and you do not have by default. But when you don't have them and they come up, you're screwed. Muscle, evade, and resist, and I mentioned those when I was talking about skills, are the gotcha skills in the game. Now, to the game's credit, it mentions these skills in the skill list. The little dude says, savvy players should take note of the immense value of evade, muscle, and resist. Got it. So here's the thing. Let's say that you make a spider, and the spider sprays you with webbing, and then you have to make a muscle to escape the webbing. Sounds great. Not everybody's going to have muscle. The points go quick. You're not going to have, everybody's not going to have muscle in the game. Everybody's not going to have resist. Everybody's not going to have evade. And that's going to hurt you. Muscle, I think, is the big one. Muscle would be my one. How many times do you have effectively, well, that door's stuck, or, the portcullis falls behind you. Well, I'm going to bend bars and lift gates, or I'm going to make a strength check. There's no strength check. You either bought the skill for as many points as all your other skills, or not. And I think it'd be easy to overlook those. And I think that is going to make certain encounters very difficult. So there's a lot of skills which are sort of minor must-haves. I think muscle is one of them. I think less so for evade and resist, but muscle's absolutely one of them. Armorer's pretty good. Medical, I think all of those are repair are sort of because of the way they tie into the game's healing and hit points effectively. And I'm going to put hit points in quotes because there's no hit points in this game, which is one of the interesting ideas of the game. But I do think that hurts a little bit, right? Because and there are a few games like this where, like we played Alternity and there was a couple skills where you said, well, no one bought this skill which allows us to help resist damage, or stuff like that, right? There's games that have it. I think this game has a little bit of that with muscle, evade, and resist. I think, and this is a complaint I'm going to have about it generally, is that balance is all over the place. I think the fact of the matter is the game is very simple in its point buy system. A lot of things cost 3, some things cost 5, some things cost 1. Right? It's very simple. The math is super simple, and I love that. But things like, but as a for instance, if I look at gear. As I get in here, the basic armaments list here, I can either take a greatsword that requires 2 hands and costs 3 points and does a D10, or a battle axe for 2 more points that not only does a D12, but only requires a single hand, and it ignores 2 of the target's defense, which effectively means that against a hard target, a target with defense, it does a D12 plus 2, really. Not just a D12, but the 2 defense would subtract 2 from the greatsword's attack, whereas the 2 defense will not subtract from yours. It's armor piercing, effectively. And that's only 5 points. That's 2 more points. And for 2 more points, I've upped my average damage by 1 to 3 points a round. That's pretty good stuff. I don't know if that works out point buy wise, to be honest. I just don't know, but it feels like, why would I take a dagger? Dagger costs 1 point and it's a D4. Unless I wasn't planning to use it. Or I was a battle master and I was trying to get my dice to explode. But even exploding D4s statistically are not quite as good as a D12. You should probably just roll a D12. I would have to look up the chance of... So the chance of a D4 exploding to be better than a D12, you'd have to get 3 of them. And so it would be 25% and 25%. So a fourth of a fourth. So 1/16th. So 1/16th at a time, a battle master with a walking staff is better than a battle axe. Otherwise, just take the damn battle axe. And so I think the balance is a little messy, if that makes any sense. And I don't think it's critical, but I think there's a lot of it, and it's sort of all over the place in the book. And as you delve more into the book and look at your options, there are so many places where it's like, well, why wouldn't I take so deadly? So there's an upgrade on a weapon called Deadly. For 3 points, you essentially double the damage of the weapon. You add an additional die of the weapon's type. Or Bleed, which is even better. After inflicting damage, the target bleeds the same damage for D4 rounds. So effectively, you have Deadly Weapon, which doubles your damage, and Bleed, which is essentially 2.5 times the damage on average. Or I can, for the same number of points, take Die Upgrade, which simply ups the die to the next step, which is a 1-point upgrade on average. So I just feel like between those two, you would never take Die Upgrade. There is no point to taking that. Whereas... And balanced weapon, same thing. Ignore 1 target defense. That means on an armored target, you're doing 1 more point of damage around. Just take deadly. Just take it. That is absolutely better in all cases to taking balanced weapon. Now, you could, of course, take both of them because each of them costs 3, and that's fine. But if you're going for most bang for your buck, you take bleed first and then deadly second. And I don't even know if they stack. If they do, then take deadly and then bleed, and then you're effectively upping your damage by, on average, 5 times for 6 more points. And that doesn't, it just, no, don't get me wrong. There's any number of things which can go wrong with that. This piece of gear could be destroyed, in which case the points you paid for it are lost, and you have to spend them again. So that's cool, right? That's a little bit of a gotcha in there, right? All it takes is one acid-spewing creature to start destroying gear, and that magical, cool sword that you got from your father is melted, and you're up, have to spend the points again. I do absolutely get it, but I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of things in here which I go, I don't feel the balance makes sense. It's a neat system, and it's sort of fun because you can then go upgrade your gear at a smith, and you can spend hero points. And you get hero points, of course, as experience, and you also get it as loot. Like, you could find a treasure, and there's no money in the game either. So your treasure of, 100 rubies or whatever, the GM could go, okay, guys, you get 12 points to split amongst yourselves, and then that goes into your hero point total, and that's cool. And so you can go, well, I got 3 points. Let me go and have someone hone the edge of this sword and make it deadly. So you go to a smith and do that. Now you have a deadly weapon. That's super cool. That's really fun, and sort of an easy way to manage, say, crafting, either for you or for a smith that you go to or whatever. And so I think it's a fun system, and I do think all of the imbalances could be ironed out, but I guarantee you that if I handed this book to my buddy Scott, he'd be like, yep, I've calculated already that we're going to do a blah, 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 longsword battle master deadly, or whatever. He would come up with whatever it is, because again, you can also take limitations on your gear to knock the point cost down. So there's really no reason to not go, well, we're going to go, heavy is occupy 2 items in inventory, which is a little clunky. You could just take sought after. Nefarious folk are seeking this gear. So again, you're sort of poking the GM and going, are you going to call me on this or not? And of course, the GM is going to at some point. But if, again, all of your players are doing that, then you only have so much story space in a given night. And so the chance of you getting to that guy's stuff to make it worth the points they got for it decreases. It is a problem with every point-buy system that ever has existed. So just keep that in mind. So the imbalances don't super bother me because I do think they all could come out in the wash. I think you could easily house rule deadly versus bleed versus whatever. I think it doesn't really matter that much. And yeah, everybody's going to be carrying, no one's going to carry a dagger probably, except maybe someone statistically figures out some bleed battle master dagger build or something. Who knows? I think all that could be worked out in the wash. But I do think there are suboptimal options in there. And definitely at some point, people are going to figure out the optimal way and the suboptimal way to build the character. And you're going to have to figure out what you do when that happens. But again, none of that bothers me. What bothers me, though, and when I say I don't think this game is complete, is there are just parts that just don't make sense, or are absolutely unexplained, or they look like there's a rule missing, or something is absolutely missing. So, for instance, you can buy for, I don't know how many points, I have to look. Let's look. So in the basic gear list, for 2 points, you can buy a bear trap. You get one of them, muscle to escape. And that's you might go, well, okay, that's pretty cool, man. Like muscle to escape. So you can put a bear trap out and capture someone or something in the bear trap. No enemy has a muscle, like no enemies have a set of skills or a muscle score or anything like that. There is no such thing. Like if you look at the enemies in the book, no enemy has muscle at all. Unless I'm missing something amazingly simple. Like maybe they have hit points. You don't have hit points, they have hit points. Maybe I'm missing something super simple. And so if I do, I apologize greatly. But there's no animal in this game that has a muscle stat or a skill at all. And so what does that mean? What do you do? Right? And so, I mean, right, enemies have 5 stats: hit points, attack, defense, phase, and tactics. Done. And that's sort of it. So, I mean, it's great. You can fit them on a little card. And there's stuff in there, and they all are, and we'll talk about that maybe later. But they don't have muscle, so what do I do with a bear trap? Is it only for other humans? Because even other humans in the game are defined in these miniature monster stat blocks. Like if I capture an assassin or a dire wizard, right, he's in here. He's in the monster section of the book. And he doesn't have a muscle anything. Now, can you make one up? Of course you can. Absolutely 100%. So, maybe it doesn't matter. You just go, okay, he has a muscle of 9. Done. And you roll it and you're done. And that's fine. But the fact is, that's not a good rule. Like, don't put that in the book then. Put muscle to escape, or like what, there's no indication of how strong a creature is to get out of one of these things. A dragon has over 200 hit points. Is he a muscle 9 or is he a muscle 50? Right? A giant. Don't know. Is it muscle? It could, yeah. So that's my point. My point is there's a lot of that in the game in little bits and pieces. They're little one-liners. A lot of stuff in this book is just a one-liner. Here's a skill. It's one sentence tells you what the skill does. Good luck, because you may have to interpret it. And there might not be anything to help you interpret this. So, for instance, another one, the faith skill. So the faith skill, you're going, what the hell is the faith skill, right? Because it just says the ability to call forth miracles with prayer. And now there is a section on miracles. You can take the holy path once you get 15 points, and you can walk the holy path, and you can roll your faith skill to earn a miracle. And the miracle is a little wishy-washy. It's like a wish kind of thing, right? Then the GM goes, oh, hey, But there's also this mechanic that as you cast spells that heal or bless or protect someone, your faith goes up to a max of 14. So your faith skill increase. But when you fail a casting roll, you then lose all that extra faith. There is no roll to cast spells in the game, except for those miracles. So they must be talking about miracles. If you fail a miracle, but you can't do that at the beginning. You can only do that like several missions in, like 5, you might be 10 sessions in, let's say, and you've got 15 points earned, and you've decided to walk the holy path. So now you can pray for miracles. And that's the only time you roll a faith to cast a spell. And you're not even casting a spell. So again, it's unless you take certain limitations on your spells, which you don't have to take, you never have to roll faith. And the miracles are this special one-off, goofy GM fiat kind of thing. So there's no mechanical reason typically to roll faith. So you're going to have a 14. I mean, or unless you buy it to higher, of course. So it just, there are parts which don't make sense, and that it feels like either I am missing something, or that the game has some gaps in it, or maybe wasn't, edited or play tested fully. Maybe no one ever, went that route, or I don't know. But there's just things that refer to other things that don't exist. Another example is, as you earn experience, the game says every 10 hero points, you'll get a bonus reward specific to your hometown. And you can pick hometowns in the game. And there's little blurbs. The game is rife with fiction, sort of, and lore, because it is sort of defining this world as part of the book. There are no hometown bonuses anywhere in the book. There is nothing. Again, it was just omitted or left out or cut because of length or something, and no one went back and took out that sentence. And so you can sit there and search the PDF, and you are not going to find it. It is an incomplete book. It's not a horrible book, but it is incomplete, and you are going to have to navigate those things and sort of go back and forth with your players and make a lot of calls for a game that's, player facing and, purports to be, parts of it you don't even need to, like, the GM doesn't need to really do much because you can just let the players handle some of this. The answer is, you're going to have to answer a lot of questions, interpret a lot of things, make up a lot of rulings on the spot, and make up some rules. Like, what if your characters earn 10 points before the next book comes out with actually the hometown rewards? Well, you're going to have to make that crap up. And that's fine. But the book is incomplete, 100%. And I do think as I read through, I wonder, like, the mix of mechanical and fast and loose are going to be a strange mix at times. The way that inventory is handled, and I know why it's handled, because of the combat and attrition system. And the attrition system is bordering on genius, I think. And we'll talk about it real quick, even though I haven't even gotten to spells yet, which I want to talk about. But let's talk about attrition super quick, right? So attrition system, you don't have hit points in the game. Instead, you have up to 10 skills and up to 10 items that you're carrying. When you get hit, based on the monster and the attack it uses, you have to cross off anywhere between one and many of one or both of these things. And cross them off, right? So, for instance, you could get hit by a monster which does basic attrition, and then I roll randomly and say, well, I'm sorry, your medic skill went away. You have to cross that off. You only get that back when you heal. You can't use that skill anymore. Maybe he broke your hand, and now your hand is all, I can't needle and right? I can't. Now, it doesn't hurt any other skills. So again, the narrative coolness of that might go away, because you can still pick locks, even though your hand's busted, but you can't do the medic skill. And whatever. I'm not going to worry about the narrative story behind that. You can make something up. You got hit in the head, man, so you're buzzing a little bit. You can't. Your hands, you're unsteady. You could also be geared, so your lantern might get busted, or the guy slashes the straps of your backpack off, and everything out of there bursts out onto the floor, and the backpack is rendered useless. And so it's neat, but it means you have, but it then makes a lot of those flaw choices even worse, because if you limit the number of skills you get, or limit the number of items you have, that grossly limit your hit points. In the future, I mean, your maximums, right? But it also, and again, it makes things like it makes the tactic of going, well, everything I carry is always deadly and bleeds. Well, but again, if something hits that weapon and that weapon gets crossed off your sheet, it means you have to go back and repair it to get it back. So healing, because you also heal your item. So you either have the repair skill, which you need to sit at a campfire and do it, or it could be destroyed, in which case, and certain creatures destroy items instead of just damaging them, certain of their attacks. And if it's destroyed, those points are gone. Like, you have lost those points. And you have to go earn the points back, buy the weapon again, and so on and so forth. All good. I like that system a lot. I think it's fun. It's maybe a little goofy, and like I said, narratively, you're going to, it's one of those things where the narrative sounds great unless you take it too far, in which case everybody's like, well, okay, but if my hand's broken, why can I still play the piano? Or if my jaw got busted and I can no longer speak, orate, well, but I can still play my pan flute, right? Stuff like that. But don't worry about that. Like, that's dumb. I would say just roll with that. It's a fun system. It's sort of neat. It makes certain creatures super dangerous and makes certain attacks really dangerous, which is really cool, right? Instead of, well, one of the problems that I always feel that, say, Runebearer has is that, how do you make a creature dangerous is, you probably save or suck or save or die kind of mechanics, a lot of damage, like stuff like that becomes super dangerous. But sometimes it feels like old hat, like, the giant again, and you can't block his attacks because they're so massive. Oh, we've seen this before. This, and don't get me wrong, I mean, I don't know that these don't become old either, but that's, but it's neat, it's novel, it's a cool system, and I like the system. Now, having said that, because you have put all the items in this weird mechanical space now, right? So every item you carry, your rope is a piece of gear. It costs 1 point. Your lantern's a piece of gear. It costs a single point. It's on your person. Your scrolls and your, ring. It's all an item. It's all on your person. It all counts toward this attrition system. What if I buy a cloak? So let's say I have a cloak. And the cloak costs, I don't know actually how much a cloak costs. Let's take a quick look. I know you love watching me page through a book. So a cloak costs 1 point, plus 3 to stealth skill. A set of bandages, for 3 bandages. I can heal 1 crossed off skill with a bandage. So when we rest, right, we go and sit down and rest, I can use a bandage and hand you a bandage and wrap you up with my medic skill, and I've healed you. Done. That costs 3 points for 3 bandages. Can I tear my cloak into bandages? Like, is that okay? Is that a thing? Or are bandages special? Now, of course, I think by rule, you have to look and go, well, bandages obviously are special. But because you put inventory in this weird space now, you also now have wackiness, right? It's one of the things that, it's a weird vibe to have in a game, if you're dungeon crawling or whatever, where inventory sort of matters and you're trying to make that matter, and players come up with a clever use of something. It's like, well, we're all injured. I'm going to tear my cloak up into straps, use the liquor that Bob is carrying, and, dip it in, and then I'm going to use the now antiseptic cloth strips to wrap our wounds. No, you didn't pay the 3 points, right? I mean, that's sort of where you're at, or is that okay? And the answer is I actually don't know. Like, I don't know what the designer intended. And so I think a lot of those things you're going to have a little bit of weirdness, I think. And that's going to be a little bit of a negotiation, and then you're going to have to figure out sort of what the ruling is, right? That then works. And then the problem with the ruling, so let's say you allow it. You're like, that's fine. You tear the 1 point cloak into bandages. Well, then why don't they do that all the time? Because bandages are expensive, man. That's 3 points. I can I can put deadly on my axe for 3 points. So I do wonder, like, what if I find a set, like we're in a tower, locked in a tower in a bedroom, right? We're trapped like Rapunzel, but I have a bunch of bed sheets. Can I make a rope? Can I climb out of the tower? And you might say, well, of course you can. Duh, that's just stupid. What are you saying? I'm like, well, but a rope otherwise costs you points. And as soon as you put inventory into this weird mechanical space, then those questions, if you didn't do that, if inventory was meaningless in the game, in the sense that, it wasn't your hit points and it wasn't tracked so closely, I would say, I don't care, right? Yeah, of course you can. Make your climb. Done. Because it's now in this mechanical space, I'm not sure anymore. And I do think that that's something that, as a GM, especially if you're not used to a game where gear is point-based, but even in Hero, even in games like Hero and GURPS, most setting books for Hero and GURPS, or most games like Fantasy Hero and Star Hero and so on, you might stat out a weapon, but it would still cost money, and you would buy it and then just keep it, and you did not pay points for certain pieces of gear. Now, some games you might have, but a lot of the games implied that you could just have the gear and buy it, and it costs money, and so on. So I think the mix of the mechanical and fast and loose rulings over rules is going to cause a little bit of decisions to be made, a little bit of back and forth. And there's not a lot of good guidance, to be frank, in this book. This book has a lot of lore in it. It has a lot of neat ideas. What it doesn't have is, how do you actually reconcile its point-buy system to treasure, or how do you reconcile gear that you find? So if I find a cool sword, do I have to pay for it in points? Do I have to actually, like, let's say I have a 10-point sword on the floor laying in front of me. Do I have to pay 10 points to get it? I don't think you do. I think you can pick up the sword and get the sword. And if you sell it, you get some number of those points that you can then spread out and spend. Otherwise, you just have the sword. I think that's how the game runs. But I'm not exactly 100% sure. And the book does not make me sure yet. And I'm not all the way through. But I am looking and reading, and I've not yet quite found all of it. I've not yet found those answers. So that's what I don't love. So let's talk briefly about spells, and maybe I'll leave it there, and this will be part one, and maybe we'll talk a little bit about some of the other things here in a second part. So spells, it's a point-buy system again, right? You get a single cast of, so there's a list of basic, I'll call them effect, I'll call them powers. So there's 20 basic powers in the book at base, right? Arcane lock, a glyph permanently seals a door, and these almost all cost 3 points, except for invisibility, costs 5. So there you go. Mage's cloak, enchant a cape, and its wearer is targeted last, 3 points. Healing Light, heal a skill attrition with touch, 3 points. Fire Blast, okay, does damage, 3 points. Or Ghost Blade, hit 1 to 2 targets with arcane knives, which do damage. And so on, right? There's a list of super basic spells in here. Now, there's a bunch of defaults for all these spells too. So given no other information, spells require words and gestures. They expend, so you only get a single cast. So if I buy Levitate, I only get one cast of it for 3 points. Okay, that's fair. And it lasts, and I have to have somatic components, so audible words and gestures, so verbal and somatic components. The duration is 1d6 phases, and we'll talk about that in a minute. And the spell output is 1d6 effect, whatever that means. So, and it's touch, single target and touch. And those are the defaults. Now you can change all of those by spending more points, but the defaults are 1d6 phases and a 1d6 output. And the reason why the phases are important is because what you have to understand is a combat round is 1 to 5 phases. It's 5 phases. I shouldn't say that. It's 5 phases. So you might say, well, I'm going to go on phase 3. So you go on phase 3, the monster acts on a couple of these phases, your companions act on different phases, and then when it comes right back around to phase 3, done. So 5 phases is a round. So that means that by default, so just keep that in mind. So we'll talk about pros and cons in a minute, right? So you have a base power that you buy. There's defaults in effects and duration. So Fire Blast does 1d6. The knives do 1 to 2, 1d6s. You can also add more effects. So you can make custom spells, right? So by custom spells, that means like there's a list of effects. There's like 48 or so effects that you can then add to spells. There are limitations you can add to spells, much like all the rest of the things. And there's a lot of not real well-defined, right? So additional cast is add a cast to the spell. That's easy. Banish is cast out a summoned creature or construct. Metal, manipulate metal in numerous ways. That's an effect, right? Again, a little bit loosey-goosey on what that means. That's going to have to be a GM sort of ruling as to how to make that work. But some of these increase the duration of a spell, some of them increase the effect of a spell, and then some of them just add bits to a spell, more stuff that it does, right? And I think the spell system is sort of fun, right? You can go from the base list. You can go from the list of 48. You can go custom. Like if you're willing to work with the GM and the GM is willing to work with you, you could probably make something up. There are limitations to spells. There are additions to the spells. So you can up the duration or up the effect or add casts for 3 points each, that kind of thing, right? All of that. In addition, Magic has neat advancement paths. You can pick to be a sorcerer, which only gets to pick the base spells, but you memorize them all and don't have to tie them to, say, pieces of inventory. Wizards have different, each subclass. They're effectively subclasses. Mages get subclasses. And so when you pick, the mage, you can build custom spells and you can bind them to your inventory. So you can have like items to get to cast those spells. And then you have wizards, and wizards like take different paths, and they can go and buy all these different advancements based on if they're, at Starfall and they fell from the sky, or an ancient one, or a demonologist, and so on, right? So you actually have some really cool, some really cool and really neat sort of subclasses within that wizard, this wizard type mages. And so it's, again, the pros of the system is I like the idea of the system. I like the promise of the system. It seems like it's going to be fun to build your own spells. And more to the point, I actually think wizards, because they have to sit and do that, are more futzy than everything else, right? They have to sit down and go, well, what am I going to make? Let me put this spell together, right? And I think that feels good a little bit. And it feels good because it's simple enough to just do. Unlike, say, in Hero, where putting together your own spell, requires mathing it and the GM to understand and approve all those things, because the player may or may not have done it correctly, or maybe interpreting something weirdly, or might have done the math wrong, right? Whereas this, because it's simple addition and subtraction, I think it feels very simple, and I would turn it over to a player and go ahead, make a spell. And you go, well, I'm going to make it teleport and do damage to someone, and that kind of thing, right? And I think that feels good for a wizard type character to have to engage more mechanically with the rules, if that makes any sense. It almost feels like they are studying or being a master of arcane knowledge. And I think that's neat. I think the subclasses are neat, but only one type of mage gets them, which I think is a little bit of a bummer. But some of the subclass, like, again, a sorcerer is going to be totally different than a mage and totally different than a wizard in terms of, I think, how they feel in the game. I think that's cool. And there's tons of room for the GM to add bits here too, right? And you could literally walk and go to your player's handbook or your Pathfinder core rulebook and pick a spell out and go, I can probably sort of putz this and make something which feels like this. Or that can become a new effect, which I will put into the game. So I think overall there's a lot to be said for that system. I think it has some neat bits. But I'm going to come back to my same complaint that I just had, which is I don't think it's fully complete, and I think the balance is all over the place. And I don't know if it's, like I said, a playtesting problem or an understanding problem or an editing problem. But why would you take Fire Blast over Knives? They both do the same damage, except for Ghost Knives, on average, does 1.5 times the damage, because it's going to hit one or two guys. Why would you just take Fire Blast? You can take Ghost Knives. And you might say, well, because Fire Blast is going to do fire damage, and some creatures might be weak to fire. And you go, sure, I can just add an effect. I can just add an effect to the spell and make them fire, right? Or I can just add an effect to the spell and make it cold. So now you have cold knives, ice knives, or fire knives, or whatever it is. But why? I mean, it just doesn't make any sense to have spell that does damage and spell that does damage to more than one target cost the same. It just doesn't make any sense. Now, again, easy to fix. I mean, it's actually weirdly not easy to fix, because it hits 1d2 targets, which is 1.5 times, so it should cost 4.5 points. So, but you know what I mean? It's easy to fix. I get it. But why is it in there like that? Why am I fixing this? Similarly, there's Healing Light. Heal a skill attrition with touch. And one of the spell effects is Restore. Heal 1 skill attrition by default with touch, because everything's with touch. So, I mean, I suppose, is it supposed to be in there twice? I don't know, but I suppose it is in there twice. I suppose they're all in there twice. So I take that back. Maybe they're all just in there twice, but some of them aren't in here twice. So, for instance, I see Blast, inflict magic damage of a specified theme, element, or style. I see Levitate is in there 2 times, because it's in the basic list and the effects list. But Courage isn't. And Dream Spike isn't. And so, again, none of these are huge. I feel like I'm being nitpicky, except there's so many of these that it just got to me as I kept going in the book. It just kept poking me, and I'm like, oh God, I hate myself. Right? I don't think the system is bad, but boy, I just wish it was a better put together system. I wish the book as written felt better, because right now it feels a little messy and a little incomplete and maybe a little sloppy in terms of putting the rules together. Another thing I worry about is that the defaults, I understand why the defaults are low as they are, but I also wonder whether those defaults don't make certain effects and powers useless. So, and let's talk about the combat system, but casting a buff on yourself seems like almost a loss, because casting a spell takes your entire action. So if I act on round 1, phase 3, and I cast a buff on myself, I need it to last 5 or 6 phases to actually impact my next turn. Now, if it's something like defense, well, then I at least get that effect for some of the enemy's turns, I hope. But if it's something like run faster, or you up buff your attack, or whatever, then the answer is, well, that's not going to work, because that spell 2/3 of the time is not going to last until your next action. You will never get the benefit of that buff. Like I said, well, 2/3 of the time you won't get the benefit of that buff. Even casting on someone else who goes later than you in the turn, it's very possible that your spell ends before it gets to that person's phase, and that doesn't feel good. Like that's not cool. Should they at least always get one use of the thing? I don't know, but by default, it is very possible to cast a spell that has no actual appreciable effect, because it will run out before it gets to have any appreciable effect. And what this means is that instant spells, like attack spells and instant spells that just do a thing, are better than buffs, because buffs rely on having a duration that makes them useful. And if you buff, it needs to be someone else, and you need to carefully time your buff, so that your target gets any impact at all. And if it's you, if you're just targeting yourself and trying to buff yourself, then if you roll a 1 to 4, you get nothing out of it. Unless it's a defensive buff that makes the monster miss or something like that, that's different. But if it's like an attack buff or a run buff or a buff for you, I don't know that you get any benefit at all. And then, frankly, 1d6 phases make certain things, well, not make a ton of sense, right? Like, so, for instance, you have a cloak effect. Reduce the chance of being spotted by others. This can have many variations, including camouflage, stillness, and deception. Okay. If I'm sneaking through an enemy room or a fortress or something, 1d6 phases is a blink of an eye. I'm never going to be able to actually make that spell worth anything. And the spell has no combat effect. It is literally just, you're not seen as often. So I imagine it would be a plus to your stealth or something of that nature, right? For how long? 1d6 phases is nothing, and you can buff that, but you can only buff it, in theory, 3 times with the duration effect, which makes it 1 round, the first one, and I assume 2 rounds and 3 rounds. 3 rounds is still seconds. It's not minutes. It's not enough to sneak through a whole room. I mean, it might be, I suppose, if the room's small enough. But you know what I mean? Like, it's not enough to make an impact on a scene or multiple scenes or whatever. And so you're going to have to home rule that and make decisions as to how long spells last, because by default, they don't last that long at all. And even at max, they barely last, unless you take lasting, which is an effect for 15 points, and then it's permanent. So it's either not a lot or permanent. Okay, that doesn't feel good. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with storm calling. Conjure a type of weather when outdoors. Does that last, or is it instant? Is it instantly I make a storm? I would probably I'd probably make the ruling that when you storm call, it just does it. But I don't know that that's true. And by the rules, if it doesn't last just as long as it lasts, hours, right? I conjure a storm with lightning. Okay, you do. Boom, hours. Well, or 6 seconds. I don't know which. The game doesn't help me. Tell me which. So there's a little bit of that in a lot of places, and I just kept seeing it over and over. And it takes what I think is a really neat idea, but it really, but I'm gonna have to tighten this up if I'm gonna, if like right, you know what I mean? Like I'm going to have to sit down, and you as a GM are gonna have to, I feel, sit down. And I'm sure people are gonna say, we played it, we didn't have any of these problems, and everybody got into the spirit of it. And I'm like, sure. I'm not saying that that's not possible. I'm not even saying that's improbable. From my own experience with my own players, and I think a lot of groups in the world, people are going to want to know how long that damn spell is. And the game doesn't do a good job of helping me make that decision. This book does not help me make that decision very well. And I don't like that. I think the game is full of neat ideas and seems like it could be super fun. And we haven't even talked about combat. I'm 100 pages in right now, really, as far as all the things I've talked about. I haven't even gotten to fighting, really. I mean, it's in there somewhere. But we haven't talked about it. And I think the game is actually probably pretty neat and probably is pretty fun. But I do think the first few sessions would be a lot of rulings over rules kind of thing, where we'd have to really go back and forth. The last thing, we'll hit it off real quick before we leave. Companions. So that's another thing you're going to be buying with your character points as a companion. Again, it's sort of cool, pretty simple. Companions can be 3 points, 5 points, or 12 points. The more points you spend, the more skills, the better attacks, and probably better defenses that your companion gets. And the skills are not the same skill list as your player skills. They are companion skills. And so it sort of works for that animal companion type gig. Well, your companion could retrieve and go grab an object for you, or report, scout the area and report back, or carry stuff, right? Like you can carry its weight, or taunt an enemy and cause the enemy to attack it. And so I love a little bit of that, right? Because you're going to have a skill, retrieve 9. So you have to roll. Okay, go, Lassie, go get the ball. And you roll an 8, and Lassie goes and gets the ball and brings it back. Done. And this system, again, it looks neat. And then you dive into it and you go, oh, it has similar ambiguities to the rest of the systems. What does carry even mean? There is no weight. Items cost points, and you get 10 slots. Animals don't have slots. I don't see any slot. There's no slots for animal inventory in here. Animals have skills, but they don't have inventory slots. So wouldn't it be easier to say carry? Based on the size of the creature, you get 2, 4, or 6 inventory slots, which again, you're going to have to make that roll up as a GM. There's an advantage for animals. You can level up your creatures too, and called precise, which says your companion ignores most penalties in combat. Okay, which ones doesn't it ignore? Right? I don't know what that. I mean, I don't know. I assume it means everything you can think of, and you'll know it when you see it. Is sort of how the game sort of operates, right? The writing operates like most penalties. Something supernatural, then it's going to. That's what I assume. I assume that it's largely relying on you, the GM, to go. What does it ignore and what doesn't it ignore? It ignores most of them. So maybe ghosts who chill it, give it a penalty in combat or something, right? And don't get me wrong, there's not that many penalties in combat anyway, so that's sort of a weird one. But it's ambiguous, very ambiguous. Feral. That's the one that actually got me and made me, again, write that down, because companions are fairly weak in the game. They only get 1, 2, or 3 skill slots, which probably means they only have 1, 2, or 3 attrition, right? So your elephant has 3 attrition, or whatever. Your 12-point animal has 3 attrition. They don't get their own action in battle. They act with you. So if you tell Lassie to go get the ball, she makes a retrieve roll, grabs the ball, and that's your action. You are done. You take the same action. It's like the ranger in D&D, like the base ranger that everybody griped about. So your animal companion really just is a little bit of a plot device. It's a bucket of extra skills, so different skills, but you're not going to use your animal companion to fight with you. You're going to use it as almost supplementary skills. So some of those skills, like taunt, if you tell the animal to taunt, you're not taunting it and then you get to attack. You're taunting it and then it attacks your creature, and then that's it. That's all you get to do. So you hope your buddies will then kill the monster because your animal taunted it. I don't super care. I assume that rule has a good reason to be there. So that's not what bugs me. What bugs me is feral means that once the animal attacks, it will continue to attack until all the immediate enemies around it are dead or fled or whatever. But it doesn't get its own attacks. So does feral mean that the animal takes all of my attacks from then on? Because that's a deal break. All my actions are just the animals until everything's dead? Because the animal probably doesn't do as much damage as me anyway. It would be better off sitting back and cheering me on if it wanted everything dead. But it's not going to. Or does it get to attack then? In which case, that sounds like an advantage. So we're just back to that. What I hate about this video is it sounds like I don't like this book. But I like the book. I really do. But there's a lot of this in the book. And a lot of it has to do with the point mechanics and so on. I think the combat system, for what it's worth, which we'll talk about next video if there is one, is actually pretty slick and pretty cool. I think it's pretty neat. I like the book. But there's a lot of this. And you just have to understand that the book in and of itself is not a complete game. You're going to have to fill in a lot of gaps. And if you're okay with that, I think there's some neat ideas here. The book's very evocative. There's some cool stuff. We'll talk about some of that next time. Thank you very much for watching, and I will talk to you later.